Hello and welcome back to the Folgering College Pre-Press class. This is Professor Ben Hewitt talking about my favorite printing topic, color management. When we last left, we were talking about the color management process, how first you calibrate your equipment, then you characterize, then you convert. I know I'm repeating myself, but in case you watch the videos not quite back to back to back, which I know I wouldn't. Nobody wants to listen to anybody talk for that long. Anyways, first you calibrate. You make sure your devices are doing the same thing every time. If your devices are not doing the same thing every time, you have two choices: to either give up and let it do what it's doing, or to go forward and fix it. Anyways, so it needs to be doing the same thing every time. Once it's doing the same thing every time, you can characterize it, which is figure out what is it doing the same every time. And lastly, you can convert, which is to transform the color to fix what it's doing wrong. If it's always getting green wrong, you can adjust it by changing how it outputs that color. That is the color management process. Let's look at what it takes to make a profile. So if you're going to make an ICC profile for a device, if a device has never been profiled, it needs to be re-profiled, and you really only need to do it once normally, but sometimes you need to after big maintenance, because sometimes it's basically like getting a new machine, depending on how much has been replaced inside. Think the grandfather's axe syndrome, which I now have to explain. Sorry. So the grandfather's axe paradox is, imagine your grandfather has an axe that he loved, and he used it to chop firewood for his whole life as a boy into an adult. And he gives it, it comes into your possession. And you continue to use it to chop wood for your fires, for cooking, for felling trees on your land or whatever. But after a while, you know what? The axe handle breaks. And so you make a new axe handle. You get a new piece of wood, you put it in there, and you keep going for a while. And then after a while, something bad happens, and the actual iron head on your grandfather's axe breaks, and you can't fix it. So you have to replace it. You get a new axe head and you put it on there, and you keep using it. You still think of it as your grandfather's axe, but how much of that is actually your grandfather's axe anymore? Once you've replaced enough of the parts, is it even original? This is a question also of the USS Constitution in Boston Harbor, the oldest commissioned sailing ship still afloat. Great ship, got to visit her once. Really wonderful thing. But it's been in the water over 200 years. They've replaced nearly every part of the ship over its service life in the Navy. There's not much left that was actually there in the 1800s. Most of it has been replaced several times. It's still the same ship, but as it replaced piece after piece after piece, how much of it is actually the ship anymore and not a replica? How do you know? At what point? Anyways, so all that is to say, at some point in maintenance, you replace enough parts that you really do need to profile again, because it's not the same press anymore. Sure, the box it's in is the same box, but if you replace enough parts, it's no longer itself, is it? Alrighty. So the profile, you need a profile target, you need hardware, and you need software. A profile target, ooh, I get to use my favorite word. A profile target is a series of color swatches. These are all known value colors. These are all colors with known C-lab values for each one. So you're giving it a test and you already know the answers. You want to see how it's going to answer it. But don't think of this as like a standardized test to see if you're going to get into college or anything. This is more like one of those personality tests you take to see if you're, what kind of personality am I? And you answer those personality quizzes to know what kind of person you are and how you should relate to others. This is what a profile target does for any sort of device. And it's measured using a spectrophotometer. I really love that word. And the spectrophotometer lives up to its name by actually measuring the wavelength of light reflected by any object. Isn't that cool? You can measure anything with one. My girls even have a toy spectrophotometer at home. I'll show it to you sometime. It's a fun little toy. It doesn't do very accurate color reads, but it scans objects in the house and tells them what color it is. It's good for learning your colors. And it chuffs me because, hey, it's a spectrophotometer in there. It's actually measuring wavelengths of light. But to make it more kid-friendly, they made it very forgiving. So like anything even remotely blue comes out as blue. It doesn't tell you the lab values. I wonder if I could hack it. Anyways, so each patch has a known standard value. This profile target here is called the IT8/7.4. Yes, they all have really fun names like this. My favorite is the P2P25X, which is the one you use for G7 color management, which is the current industry sweetheart method. It's the way we do things. Scroll the right direction, will you, computer? Sorry, guys. So you need the target. Then you need hardware and software. So you can have automated chart readers, or you can read them with the spectrophotometer and one at a time get them in. The measurements are recorded into software. Color management software will take these measurements and create a profile. It'll say, I know what you're doing there. I see what your answers are to this personality quiz. And now I know how you are going to answer the question, what is red? You can also include special criteria like, is it going to use UCR or GCR? How is it making its black for a 4-color? And are you controlling total coverage? Are you keeping that total print ink below that 320% level? Or are you allowing it to go higher than that to keep its color more true to form? All decisions that have to be made. For scanners, you would scan a target and then compare it against reference data. So the scanner will scan the produced target that's already been done off a color managed device, and then it will see how well the colors the scanner sees match up to the ones that have been agreed upon as correct. And then the scanning profiling software can then create an ICC for the scanner. Displays, you can actually do this for your display. And if we were in person on campus to do this, we would do this on campus. You can actually stick a spectrophotometer up to a computer screen. When it's scanning things like paper and objects, it puts off a light, and that light helps it reflect off of the subtractive color space it wants to measure. If you're using additive color, it simply doesn't use the light, and it will record what light is being beamed directly into it. So you can also profile a computer display. This is very important to get a properly profiled, calibrated display so that you know when you're working on graphics on your computer that you are seeing what it's going to really look like. If you work unmanaged on your computer, you're going to be disappointed when you try to export somewhere else because it will never match up. Even when you're calibrated, it's not going to be 100%. It won't get rainbows and unicorns all the time. Actually, literally, you won't get rainbows. You'll be missing some of those colors. Sorry. And so for printers, it's a little more time consuming. You need to print out the target, and you measure it on the spectrophotometer or the bar reader, and you take that to your profiling software, and you measure it. And then you can also then print out a second target using the profile. And that should help you get closer and closer till it's as reined in as it's going to be. How do ICC profiles get used? Well, they translate the color from one device to another. Like I've been talking about a little bit too much, by understanding how they all define lab space, how they define normal, recognizable colors, lets you know what it is they're going to do, and you can accommodate for that. I should also give you my social introduction to how this stuff works. And I am the butt of part of this joke, but so is one of my friends growing up. So there are my friend group from back in high school. There were 4 of us best friends. There was me, other Ben, also known as Evil Ben, Fred, and Matt. We all showed up at different times. Ben was a good guy who would host us a lot of times. I know I said he was evil. It's just old joke. Anyway, so my friend Ben would have like game parties. We'd all come over and play video games against each other. And he would invite us at different times because he knew that we'd all show up differently. Matt would show up on time because he's a good guy like that. I would be so nervous about showing up on time that I would show up a little bit early. Sometimes that's really annoying when you're hosting. And Fred, well, Fred would be pretty late. So if Ben wanted us all to arrive at 6 p.m. to eat pizza and play video games, what he would have to do is tell us all different times. He would say, hey, Matt, we're meeting at 6 for dinner. He'd be like, cool, man, I'll be there. He would tell me, hey, good, Ben, we're meeting at 6:30. I'll be like, yeah, no problem, 6:30. And tell Fred, hey, Fred, we are meeting at 2 in the afternoon. And we would all show up at 6. And that is what you're doing with ICC profiles. Once you understand how we all interpret the same data, in our cases from the social thing, how we all interpret time and how how on time we're going to be, you can then make calibrations for, calibrations, you can make conversions, you can make changes to adapt to those differences. The profile lab color space allows us to do that. There's also more direct linking available as well. A device link profile is converting the color of one device directly to another, and you don't use the third party lab color. You only go directly from one to another. Typically, you're using two things that are the same color space. In the example down here, it's a proofing press to an output press. You don't do this for everything, but for a proofing press, the job of a proofing press is to show a client what a print job is going to be before you actually produce it, spending all the money and time to setting it up properly. So its job is not to be color correct overall. The job of a proofing press is to show you as close to precisely what the other press is going to do, not to do the correct thing. If that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So in the case of a proofing press, you don't necessarily want it just linked to everything in your room. You desperately need to preview exactly what the other thing is going to do. It's like trying to get an accurate weather forecast, because people are going to make decisions based off what the proofer does, and you better hope that it's giving accurate predictions to what the actual press is going to do later. That is vital. So that bypasses the lab color in the PCS. It just says, I'm going to do my best to do exactly what the other guy's doing. Oh yeah, I just talked about this. So they're there to help maintain. They can also maintain color separation information. It'll make sure that you're outputting the same amount of the same halftones of colors. Not all proofing systems are able to preview a halftone, but when they do, it's vital that they're the same halftone as the output, because that helps people decide also on the builds of their colors. Sometimes somebody may like a color, but the way it has to be halftoned, they don't like. So the better representation of the final output you can give in a proof, the better off you are. That's what you're attempting to do. And sometimes translating to lab and back can give you some problems. So you're trying to show gradients that you're printing. If you translate CMYK to lab and back to CMYK, you get some issues. In fact, translating from a language to a second language and back to the first is the feature of the video I also shared along with this one. Apologies for some of the language in there, but the Backstroke of the West that we're watching is Star Wars Episode 3, translated from English, its original language, to, I can't remember if it's Mandarin or Cantonese. It's Chinese, I think it's Mandarin, and then back to English. And when you translate from one to another and back, you lose some things because not all languages can say the same thing. If anybody's ever watched anime, when you're listening to the sub, but also, listening to the dub, but watching the original sub, there's always a lot of fun subtitle differences between what the subtitles of the original Japanese are and what the English language voiceover actors are saying, because the direct translations don't flow very well when you're trying to speak them the same way that the original language flows. So they're idiomatic expressions. Things can be said in one language that can't be said in another. Anyways, so CMYK to CMYK, just like the Backstroke of the West, even though it's just trying to say red. If it's trying to say cyan 0, magenta 100, yellow 100, and it translates it to lab, it'll be like L50 A star, 100 or something, and then B star 0. That's great. Then you take it back over to the other side, and it's doing its best to match that LAB. And just because you're all trying to do, it's like playing a game of telephone, and your big dramatic no turns into do not want. And while it may mean the same thing, it certainly isn't the same thing, is it? It's also important to preserve the black channel. How black is generated deserves its own chapter in the book. How black is generated, whether or not you're using UCR or GCR or any of that at all, that all matters. And if you're going to do it differently on two devices, especially if you're proofing on one, that's not a good thing. Where can ICCs be used? Here's an itemized list. Ooh, it's tax season, isn't it? Here's an itemized list. can be used everywhere. In fact, they're also used on devices. You know that every machine sold, every cell phone, well, I don't know about every cell phone, but every digital camera, at least the good ones, all the computers, all the TVs, they all have an ICC profile. They're profiled at the manufacturing site to see what they can do before they are sent out. So they're all, everything we see nowadays is color managed.